Back in high school, I was pretty popular. Everyone seemed to want to be friends with me, but not because I was stuck up or mean. Honestly, I genuinely tried to be nice to everyone. I made a point of including the quiet kids in group projects and would always save a seat for anyone who asked. My phone was constantly buzzing with invites and messages, and I almost never had a free weekend. It was tiring sometimes, to be honest, but I loved having people around. But here's the strange part. Deep down, I always had this nagging feeling that people didn't actually like me, Emmy, for who I was. It felt like they were only interested in my social standing or whatever I represented. It turns out that I was mostly right. After I graduated, almost everyone disappeared from my life. The only person who stuck around was Haley. She was my absolute best friend, a true ride or die. It was the kind of friendship you only ever see in movies, the one where you could show up on her doorstep, crying at 3 a.m., and she'd just make you hot chocolate and listen without judging you. We never had any silly drama, no jealousy over guys, just total trust. We could go days without talking and then immediately start up our conversation exactly where we'd left off. When my parents would throw me out over something ridiculous, like forgetting to wash the dishes, they were pretty extreme. Haley's door was always open for me. Her family practically adopted me during those difficult times, always ready with an extra plate at the dinner table just in case I arrived. Then I met Jack at a party through some mutual friends. At first, he seemed incredibly charming. He was attentive and complimented me on things most guys wouldn't even notice, like my love for obscure indie bands. However, from the very beginning, he started trying to turn me against Haley. It started subtly with small comments about how she seemed fake or suggesting she was probably jealous whenever she complimented a new outfit of mine. He even lied, claiming she had flirted with him for cigarettes while she was with her boyfriend, which was complete nonsense. She didn't even smoke back then and was one of the most loyal girlfriends I knew. He even created a horrible nickname for her, constantly calling her Ho Haley, and wouldn't stop, no matter how much I told him it upset me. At first, I defended Haley fiercely, but his constant negative comments were like water slowly dripping on a stone. Eventually, they started to wear me down, which was precisely what he wanted. The real shift happened around Christmas when Haley forgot to give me a present while she was handing out gifts to her other friends. It sounds petty now, but at the time it really hurt my feelings. I didn't care about the gift itself, but the fact that she remembered everyone else yet somehow forgot me stung terribly. Jack immediately jumped on this opportunity. He sent me awful clown filters and made fun of me for having a friend who supposedly didn't care about me. He'd send me these long manipulative messages about how real friends remember each other. That kind of garbage seems so obvious now, but it completely worked on me back then. After weeks of his relentless pressure, I finally cut her off. I actually ghosted my best friend of 6 years over a forgotten Christmas present because a guy I barely knew convinced me she was toxic. By then, I had moved in with Jack to escape my difficult family life, which essentially gave him total control over me. Living with him was like being in a slow-motion horror movie. Things got worse so gradually that I didn't even notice how bad it was getting. He convinced me to quit my job, claiming my boss was disrespecting me. He wasn't. He tracked my location 24/7 and even told me what music I was allowed to listen to because he thought my taste was basic. He would check my phone while I was sleeping and interrogate me about random text messages with distant cousins or coworkers. I wasn't allowed to wear certain clothes because they were trying too hard or would attract the wrong attention. 8 months into this relationship, with me completely dependent on him for everything, he suddenly broke up with me. He claimed I was too much work, but then generously offered to let me stay at his place until the end of the month, as if I should have been grateful he wasn't kicking me out immediately. The second he was out the door, I called Haley. I was sobbing so hard she couldn't understand me at first, but somehow she was able to figure out what had happened. Without hesitating for a second, she told me to pack whatever I could fit in a suitcase and that she'd send an Uber to pick me up. That's when she dropped an absolute bombshell about Jack, something so shocking it helped me get over him within 24 hours. I arrived at Haley's apartment, clutching my suitcase with the few belongings I'd managed to grab. But the burden of my shame for abandoning her felt heavier than any luggage I was carrying. How do you even begin to apologize for ghosting someone who had been nothing but kind to you? I couldn't even look her in the eyes when she opened the door. I just stared at my scuffed shoes as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. Haley didn't hesitate. She pulled me into the tightest hug, and that's when I completely broke down. I started sobbing uncontrollably right there in the doorway. It was as if 8 months of fear and tension just exploded out of me all at once. She gently guided me to her couch and went to make some tea while I tried to compose myself. Her apartment looked exactly as I remembered it, full of thrift store treasures and houseplants she somehow managed to keep alive despite forgetting to water them half the time. I immediately started apologizing repeatedly for ghosting her, but Haley cut me off mid-sentence, saying she had actually been investigating Jack for months. That instantly grabbed my attention and pushed my guilt to the back of my mind. Haley then revealed the unbelievable truth. Jack was married with 2 young children in the next town over. I refused to believe it at first, telling her that was impossible since he spent every night with me. But then she pulled out a folder filled with surveillance photos, screenshots of social media accounts I'd never seen, and address records that proved everything. It felt like being punched in the stomach all over again. The evidence showed that Jack wasn't just cheating on me. He had 3 different girlfriends in 3 neighboring towns. He wasn't just a regular player either. This was essentially his job, maintaining multiple fake relationships simultaneously with meticulous precision. Then I noticed something strange in one of the photos. It showed Jack entering a massive mansion on the wealthy side of town, the kind of place with a gated driveway and fountains that ordinary people only see in movies. I asked Haley what connection Jack had to the super wealthy Riverstone family who owned the house. I wondered if he was their gardener or something. The Riverstones basically owned half the town, including the chemical plant that employed most of the local residents. Haley explained that Jack wasn't just a random cheater. He actually worked for the Riverstones as their problem solver. When I looked confused, she clarified that his real job was manipulating vulnerable women to keep them quiet about Riverstone family scandals. That's when I remembered something that had seemed totally unimportant at the time. Jack had specifically approached me right after I mentioned witnessing some strange activity at the Riverstone chemical plant where I'd been walking my dog. I had seen workers dumping giant barrels of something glowing green into the river at about 2 a.m., which looked incredibly sketchy. When I'd mentioned it to some friends at the party, everyone laughed it off. But not Jack. He immediately bought me a drink and started asking questions about my dog and where I liked to walk. I had thought it was just a coincidence, but Haley showed me a list of other women Jack had isolated over the years. Every single one was connected to some scandal involving the Riverstones. One woman had been their housekeeper and overheard sensitive conversations. Another had dated the Riverstone son and witnessed drug use, and so on. One name on the list immediately jumped out at me: Natasha, my former coworker who had mysteriously disappeared last year. The police had dismissed the whole thing, saying she had just moved away without telling anyone, but that story never felt right to me. She left her cat behind with a neighbor, and all her belongings were still in her apartment. Who does that if they're just moving? Haley suggested we contact Natasha's sister, Riley, who had also never believed the official story. I called Riley that night and tried explaining our suspicions, but understandably she was very hesitant to trust some random stranger making wild accusations. I was claiming a prominent local family had a professional manipulator on their payroll who was targeting women. It sounded completely insane, even as I was saying it. Still, Riley agreed to meet us at a public cafe downtown the next morning, probably more out of desperate hope for answers than actual belief in my story. Riley showed up looking nervous but determined, clutching a USB drive containing Natasha's journal entries. She was constantly looking over her shoulder and spoke in a hushed voice as if she expected someone to be listening. She warned us that the Riverstones had immense influence with the local police. So we quickly moved our meeting to Haley's car, which was parked a few blocks away just to be safe. Natasha's journals detailed how Jack had used the exact same manipulation tactics on her, gradually cutting her off from friends and family. The entries became increasingly paranoid toward the end, with Natasha writing that she felt constantly watched and was planning to leave town suddenly. But the journals also mentioned a woman called V, who apparently helped women escape from situations like this. The last entry simply said, "Meeting V tomorrow. We'll be free soon." We realized that finding this mysterious ally needed to be our next move. Riley mentioned that V worked at the community center's domestic violence program, but the center had already closed for the day. We decided to go back first thing in the morning to find her. I remember feeling this strange mix of relief that I wasn't crazy for suspecting Jack, and absolute terror that he might do to me whatever he had done to Natasha. As we drove back to Haley's apartment, I noticed a black SUV that seemed to be following us for several turns. I tried telling myself I was just being paranoid after everything I'd learned. But Haley took a bunch of random turns that confirmed someone was definitely tailing us. You don't make 4 right turns in a row unless you're trying to confirm you're being followed, right? My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Haley drove to a crowded shopping mall to try to lose whoever was following us. But as we walked through the parking garage toward my car, I spotted Jack leaning against it, scrolling through his phone as if he were waiting for someone. His posture was totally casual, but seeing him there made my blood run cold. We quickly ducked behind a concrete pillar before he could spot us. We managed to sneak out through a service entrance, but then my phone started blowing up with texts from Jack, asking where I had gone and why I wasn't at his place. That's when I realized he must have installed some kind of tracking software on my phone during our relationship. The messages got increasingly angry, with the last one simply saying, "I know where you are." We need to talk. Back at Haley's apartment, I completely reset my phone to factory settings to get rid of whatever spyware Jack had installed, but that meant losing access to all my accounts and contacts. Haley lent me her old laptop so I could start rebuilding my digital life from scratch. I tried to retrieve some important documents from my email, but I discovered Jack had changed all my passwords. That's when we realized just how thoroughly he had prepared to maintain control over every aspect of my life. The depth of his planning was terrifying. This wasn't just an angry ex, this was someone who had methodically ensured I couldn't escape his influence. Haley suggested we visit the community center first thing in the morning to find this V person, but we were worried Jack might be watching the building. We agreed to wear disguises using some items from Haley's old theater costume collection from her college days, when she was very involved in community plays. She had a whole box of wigs and fake glasses and other props from a Shakespeare production where she played multiple roles. At 8 a.m. the next morning, we showed up at the community center wearing ridiculous wigs and sunglasses that probably made us look more suspicious than if we had just walked in normally. I had on an awful blonde bob wig that made me look like a middle-aged soccer mom, and Haley was wearing a bright red wig that was definitely meant for a drag show. The receptionist told us that V wouldn't arrive until noon, so we decided to wait at a small diner across the street to avoid being spotted hanging around. In the diner, I immediately recognized our waitress as Sandy, a girl Jack had briefly dated right before me. I'd seen pictures of her on his phone once and he had dismissed it, saying she was just an ex he remained friends with. I was absolutely terrified that approaching her might put Sandy in danger, but I knew I had to risk it. I quickly scribbled a note asking her to meet us in the bathroom when she had a minute. Sandy joined us in the tiny bathroom a few minutes later, immediately recognizing me despite my ridiculous disguise. When I mentioned Jack's name, she looked absolutely terrified, confirming that he had also isolated and controlled her for months before moving on to me. Her hands were literally shaking as she described how he had gradually taken over her life, even convincing her to drop out of nursing school because it was too stressful. Sandy then revealed that Jack had threatened to release some embarrassing photos of her if she ever talked about their relationship. However, he eventually lost interest in her when he found his next target, me. She admitted she'd been living in constant fear that he would somehow find her again. I asked Sandy if she knew anything about V or the Riverstones, but she became visibly shaken at the mere mention of the family name. She looked like she might pass out, gripping the bathroom sink for support. She lowered her voice to barely a whisper and told us that the Riverstone heir, Logan, was actually Jack's half-brother from an affair the Riverstone patriarch had years ago. This explained why Jack was so loyal to the family and why they trusted him with their dirty work. He was literally family, just the secret, illegitimate part they kept hidden. Sandy agreed to come with us to meet V, but her manager refused to let her leave in the middle of her shift. The guy was a complete jerk about it, even threatening to fire her on the spot if she walked out. We promised to come back for her after speaking with V. We finally met V at the community center around noon. She was a stern-looking woman with surprisingly kind eyes. She had a presence that just radiated calm confidence, like someone who had seen everything and couldn't be shocked anymore. She initially refused to discuss Jack or the Riverstones, but Haley showed her Natasha's journal as proof that we weren't just making things up. V confirmed she had helped several women escape Jack's manipulation over the years, but explained that the Riverstones had threatened to cut the community center's funding if she continued. She now helped victims secretly after hours to keep the center open for everyone who needed it. V offered us temporary housing at a safe house outside of town, but required us to give up our phones and any trackable devices. It felt like something out of a spy movie, but the seriousness in her eyes told me this wasn't some paranoid overreaction. I had to decide whether to completely disappear into safety or try fighting back against these people. Going to the safe house meant safety, but it also felt like letting the Riverstones win. Staying meant potential danger, but a chance at justice. I chose to accept V's help and go to the safe house, but I worried about my remaining belongings still at Jack's apartment. I didn't have much, mostly clothes and sentimental items like photo albums and my grandmother's jewelry, but the thought of leaving it all behind hurt. V arranged for 2 volunteers to retrieve my essential stuff during Jack's work hours the next day. While we were discussing all the logistics, V received an urgent call from Sandy, but couldn't understand what she was saying through her panicked crying. The garbled words and sobbing on the other end of the line made my stomach drop. We immediately rushed back to the diner, fearing the worst. We found the diner in complete chaos. Sandy was nowhere to be found, and her phone was abandoned on the counter by the register. Some customers were still sitting awkwardly eating their meals like nothing had happened, while the manager was frantically calling someone. The security footage showed Jack forcing her into his car in the back alley, and we knew we needed to act quickly to save her. My heart literally stopped for a second watching the footage of Jack shoving a struggling Sandy into his car. V immediately called her network of volunteers to start searching for Jack's car around town, but when we tried filing a missing persons report, the police refused to do anything for at least 24 hours. The officer literally yawned while taking our statement, saying, "Adults go off with their boyfriends all the time." We realized we had to conduct our own rescue mission without any official help. V drove us to the Safe House, a renovated farmhouse about 20 miles outside town. It was surrounded by open fields that gave clear sight lines in all directions, making it impossible for anyone to approach unnoticed. I felt completely paralyzed by guilt over Sandy's abduction, but Haley reminded me that Jack was the perpetrator here, not me. I couldn't help thinking that if I hadn't approached Sandy, she'd still be safely serving pancakes instead of wherever Jack had taken her. At the Safe House, we met 3 other women with similar stories about Jack, but I was shocked to learn his manipulation tactics apparently spanned over 5 years. That meant the Riverstones had been using him to silence women since he was barely out of high school himself. We began mapping connections between all his victims on a large bulletin board like detectives in a movie, using red string to connect photos and notes. One resident named DP recognized me from high school, which was weird since we were never really friends. But then she revealed she was actually investigating the Riverstones for an environmental watchdog group. This was getting more surreal by the minute, like I had stumbled into a conspiracy thriller. She shared that the family was illegally dumping chemicals that were causing local cancer clusters throughout the county. I suddenly remembered that my parents had both been diagnosed with rare cancers within months of each other, but I never connected it to living downstream from the Riverstone plant. My motivation instantly shifted from just personal survival to seeking justice for the entire community. If the Riverstones were responsible for my parents' illnesses, they needed to pay for more than just Jack's manipulation tactics. My dad had been a marathon runner before his diagnosis, and now he could barely walk to the mailbox without getting winded. DP showed us water sample reports proving contamination in the groundwater, but explained the Riverstones had buried previous investigations through bribes and threats to anyone who spoke up. Their family had literally owned the town for generations, with their name on everything from the local hospital to the main street. We needed irrefutable evidence that couldn't just be dismissed or buried. Haley suggested we contact her cousin who worked at the county records office, but worried making that call could somehow expose our location. V provided a secure phone from her network so we could make the call safely. Haley's cousin was initially hesitant, but agreed to help after hearing about Sandy's abduction. The records revealed a pattern of land purchases by Riverstone shell companies surrounding contaminated areas, buying out affected homeowners with non-disclosure agreements. They were literally creating buffer zones around their pollution sites, forcing people to sell when they got sick, and making them sign agreements never to talk about why. But these documents alone weren't enough for prosecution. We needed someone from inside the company to testify. We received word from V's contacts that Sandy had been taken to a Riverstone guest house, but it was heavily secured with private guards. A direct rescue attempt would be far too dangerous for everyone involved. The property had a 10-foot wall around it with security cameras every 20 feet and guards patrolling 24/7. DP suggested we use social engineering to gain access, but none of us had connections to the Riverstone social circle. Then we remembered Logan, Jack's half-brother, who might have his own resentments against the family that kept him in the shadows. V located Logan at a rehabilitation center for addiction treatment, but the facility had strict visitation policies. Haley posed as a volunteer bringing therapy dogs to gain access without raising suspicion. She borrowed this super-friendly golden retriever named Buddy from one of V's volunteers, and somehow faked volunteer credentials that looked legitimate enough to get past the front desk. Logan initially refused to speak with Haley, but changed his mind the moment she mentioned Jack's name. He revealed he had been silenced with trust fund money after threatening to expose the family's environmental crimes years ago. His father had basically paid him to disappear into a series of rehab facilities and keep his mouth shut. Logan agreed to help rescue Sandy and gather evidence against his family, but insisted his cooperation remain completely secret. Using his insider knowledge, we mapped the entire security system at the guest house based on his access codes, but discovered Jack had installed additional cameras beyond the standard setup. We knew we had to create a diversion to draw the guards away from Sandy's location during our rescue attempt. The night before our planned rescue, we received an encrypted message with photos of Sandy that were clearly meant to taunt us. The images showed her looking terrified but physically unharmed, sitting in what looked like a fancy bedroom. But we noticed something strange. Sandy was blinking in a deliberate pattern in each photo. I recognized it as Morse code spelling out TRAP. We realized Jack was using her as bait to capture me and Haley too. He knew we would try to rescue her and was counting on our emotional response overriding our common sense. We immediately abandoned the direct rescue plan and contacted an investigative journalist named CB with our evidence. We hoped going public would make it too risky for the Riverstones to harm Sandy. We worried the story might take too long to publish, so we also reached out to federal environmental protection agents who hopefully wouldn't be influenced by local Riverstone money like the police were. CB agreed to meet us at a highway rest stop, but called to warn us he was being followed by unknown vehicles. We had to abort the meeting and find another way to get our evidence out to the public. The EPA agent seemed interested in our claims, but required more substantial evidence than we currently had. The documents we'd gathered showed suspicious patterns, but nothing definitively criminal that would stand up in court. DP suggested we access her hidden environmental testing equipment that was still at the Riverstone plant from her previous undercover work. She had planted specialized sensors near the discharge pipes months ago, but hadn't been able to retrieve the data before being discovered as an environmentalist. Logan provided employee badges and access codes to enter the facility, but warned us about the night security schedule we needed to avoid. We planned our infiltration during shift change when coverage would be minimal. Haley, DP, and I disguised ourselves as cleaning staff and managed to enter the facility without issue. The night was overcast with no moon, which helped hide our approach to the back entrance, but an unexpected security drill triggered lockdown procedures, trapping us in the environmental testing lab. Red emergency lights started flashing and sirens blared throughout the building. The lockdown actually gave us extra time to collect water and soil samples, but it also meant security would eventually search each room. We had to find another exit route fast. DP discovered maintenance tunnels beneath the lab, but they hadn't been used in years and looked structurally unsound. Some sections had collapsed entirely, forcing us to squeeze through narrow gaps. We had to move carefully through them while avoiding potential collapse. The tunnels led us to an outlet pipe near the river, but the exit was partially submerged in what was clearly contaminated water based on the chemical smell and unnatural color. The liquid literally glowed blue in the darkness, which I'm pretty sure water isn't supposed to do. We had to hold our breath and wade through the toxic liquid while protecting our sample evidence in waterproof bags. We successfully escaped with the critical evidence, but my exposure to the chemicals caused an immediate rash and breathing difficulties. My skin burned where the water had touched it, and each breath felt like inhaling fire. Haley rushed me to an urgent care clinic in the next county over where they wouldn't immediately connect us to the Riverstone situation. The doctor recognized the chemical exposure symptoms immediately, but seemed hesitant to document them officially. She kept glancing at her computer screen with this worried expression, typing something and then deleting it. We realized the Riverstone's influence extended beyond just our town. I convinced the doctor to document everything by explaining the broader situation and appealing to her medical ethics. She admitted she had seen similar cases before, but had been discouraged from connecting them to the plant by hospital administrators. Since my medical records could be used by Riverstone lawyers, V arranged for a specialist to create duplicate records as backup evidence. We sent the samples to an independent lab in another state, but new results would take days to process. We focused on finding a way to locate and free Sandy immediately while waiting. Logan called with news that Jack was planning to move Sandy to another location, but couldn't give us the exact time. We set up surveillance on the guest house from a safe distance, taking shifts with binoculars. After 36 hours of watching the property, we spotted Jack escorting a hooded figure to his car. Security guards were patrolling the perimeter, so we could only follow at a distance rather than attempting an immediate rescue. We tracked Jack's car to a private airstrip and realized with horror that they planned to take Sandy out of the state. We had minutes, not hours, to prevent her disappearance. We had to figure out a way to stop a private plane from taking off, which isn't exactly something they teach you in school. Haley created a distraction by calling in a false fuel leak report at the airstrip, but this only delayed the flight by 30 minutes. We needed to act quickly with our limited window of opportunity. Logan arrived with his family's security credentials, but Jack recognized him immediately. The two half-brothers faced each other with intense tension, looking like they might either hug or start throwing punches. Logan had to pretend he was there on family business to check on Jack's progress with the situation. While Logan distracted Jack with family questions, I snuck onto the plane disguised as catering staff. I borrowed a uniform from a catering truck parked nearby and walked up the steps as if I belonged there. The real flight attendant spotted me almost immediately. I had mere seconds to quickly explain our rescue mission and pray she would help us instead of alerting security. I had to convince this stranger to risk her job, or possibly worse. The flight attendant revealed she had suspected something was wrong with Sandy, who was clearly being transported against her will, but she feared losing her job if she interfered. She agreed to help by creating a mechanical issue report to further delay takeoff. I located Sandy in the private cabin at the back of the plane, but she was heavily sedated and barely conscious. Her eyes were unfocused and she could barely string two words together. I had to half carry her toward the exit while trying to avoid being seen by anyone still on board. We almost reached the exit, but Jack returned to the plane unexpectedly to check on Sandy. I quickly hid with her in the tiny bathroom while he looked around. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, and Sandy was making small whimpering sounds that I was terrified he would hear. Jack began searching the plane compartments one by one, clearly suspicious something was wrong. I could see his shadow under the bathroom door and held my breath, praying he wouldn't try the handle. The flight attendant distracted him by saying the pilot urgently needed his presence for some paperwork issue. This gave us precious seconds to move toward the emergency exit on the opposite side. We managed to open the emergency exit, but the noise immediately alerted security outside. Haley had to drive our getaway car directly beside the plane for a quick escape that looked like something from an action movie. Sandy was so out of it that it took both of us to basically carry her to the car while security shouted behind us. We escaped the airstrip with Sandy, but Jack was right behind us in another vehicle. We had to navigate through back roads while calling V for emergency backup. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might actually burst out of my chest. V directed us to an abandoned gas station where her contacts waited with another vehicle, but Jack was gaining on us quickly. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, his headlights were getting closer. Haley executed a dangerous driving maneuver that temporarily disabled Jack's vehicle by forcing him into a ditch. She swerved suddenly to avoid what looked like a fallen branch, but Jack wasn't prepared and drove right into the ditch trying to avoid hitting us. We transferred the still groggy Sandy to V's contacts vehicle, but noticed Jack had called for Riverstone security reinforcements on his phone. We decided to split up to create multiple targets and confusion about which car to follow. Haley and I drove toward the safe house, but realized we were still being followed by a different security vehicle. We had to abandon our car in a mall parking lot and continue on foot through the dense woods behind it. The forest provided good cover from our pursuers, but night was falling and temperatures were dropping quickly. I wasn't dressed for wilderness survival in my thin jacket and sneakers. We used survival techniques Haley had learned in her outdoor adventure phase to stay warm and hidden until morning. After hours of hiking through the wilderness, we finally reached a highway but had no way to contact V or check on Sandy's condition. We had to risk hitchhiking to the nearest town. Knowing how dangerous that could be, we stood on the shoulder with our thumbs out for nearly an hour before anyone stopped. A truck driver offered us a ride, but seemed suspicious of our disheveled appearance and vague story. We fabricated a story about a camping trip gone wrong while silently praying he wasn't somehow connected to the Riverstones. The guy kept asking weirdly specific questions about where we were heading that made us both super uncomfortable. The truck driver dropped us at a motel where V had left an emergency package with cash and burner phones in a locker. The motel clerk recognized us from local news reports where we were being described as persons of interest in a corporate espionage case. The Riverstones had moved quickly to control the narrative and paint us as criminals. We had to bribe him with some of our emergency cash to keep quiet about our presence. We contacted V and learned Sandy was safe at a medical facility, but was still unable to speak clearly due to the drugs in her system. We couldn't yet get her testimony about her abduction, which was frustrating, but at least she was safe. The lab results from our environmental samples came back showing dangerous chemical levels far exceeding legal limits. The technician who called us actually asked if we were sure about the sample source because the contamination levels were so extreme they seemed impossible. But we needed proof the Riverstones knew about the contamination and covered it up. We reached out again to CB, the journalist, to help obtain internal documents that would show knowledge and intent. CB used his press credentials to interview former Riverstone employees, but most refused to talk due to the strict non-disclosure agreements (NDAs) they had signed. We shifted our focus to retirees, who had less to lose by speaking out. One retired engineer named Marco finally agreed to meet us, but insisted on bringing his own lawyer for protection. Marco provided internal memos showing the Riverstones knowingly continued operations despite health warnings from their own safety team. But these documents were over 5 years old, and we needed more recent evidence. Logan accessed current company emails through his family account, but discovered his access had been limited. He had to ask his sympathetic stepmother, Daenerys, for help. Daenerys initially refused to betray the family business, but changed her mind after learning her recent miscarriages might be linked to water contamination at their estate. She downloaded the entire company server onto encrypted drives for us to use as evidence. The files revealed the Riverstones had systematically intimidated or paid off anyone who became ill from their chemicals with strict NDAs. But they had kept meticulous records of each case for liability purposes, giving us documentation of hundreds of victims across 3 counties. They literally had spreadsheets tracking cancer cases with coldly calculated settlement amounts based on life expectancy and income levels. We compiled all the evidence for the EPA and FBI, but Jack somehow discovered our motel location through his connections. We had to evacuate immediately. During our hasty escape, I accidentally left behind a folder of victim testimonies. Haley, always the brave one, risked going back for them while I got the car started. We ended up separated when Jack intercepted her in the parking lot before she could get back to me. I watched helplessly from across the street as Jack forced Haley into his car, but I remembered the tracking device we had placed on his vehicle earlier as a precaution. The tracker showed Jack taking Haley to the main Riverstone estate, but security was far too tight for any kind of direct rescue attempt. We needed to accelerate our plan to involve federal authorities. We arranged an emergency meeting with federal agents, showing them the tracking data proving Haley was being held against her will, but they required a proper warrant before raiding the Riverstone property, which would take precious time. Logan offered to enter the estate under the pretense of a family visit to see what was happening with Haley, but his father had specifically banned him from the property. He had to convince Daenerys to smuggle him in through the service entrance used by the household staff. Logan successfully entered the Riverstone estate with Daenerys' help, but security protocols meant he couldn't bring any communication devices inside without being discovered. We had no way to contact him once he was inside the mansion. While Logan searched for Haley inside, I met with EPA officials and presented our evidence. The Riverstone's lawyers were already attempting to block the investigation with emergency injunctions. The agents needed to expedite the warrant process before evidence could be destroyed. Sandy finally regained consciousness enough to provide her testimony about Jack's abduction. She revealed something even more disturbing. She'd overheard plans to dispose of contaminated soil on the estate grounds that very night. We realized there was an active cover-up in progress that would destroy physical evidence. This new information accelerated the warrant approval process, but federal agents wouldn't arrive for at least 2 hours due to their location. CB published a breaking news story about the Riverstone investigation online, hoping public attention would slow down their efforts. V organized a protest at the estate gates to draw attention, but local police loyal to the Riverstones began arresting protesters on trespassing charges. We needed another approach to get inside the estate. I remembered the estate's annual charity gala was scheduled for that evening. Daenerys added me as a last-minute volunteer server through the catering company. I entered the estate in a borrowed catering uniform, but spotted Jack checking staff credentials at the security entrance. I had to quickly switch places with another server who was already cleared to enter. Inside the gala, I overheard conversations between security staff about a problem in the East Wing and immediately suspected that's where they were keeping Haley. I had to steal a master key card from an unattended security jacket. The key card got me into the East Wing, but the hallways were monitored by security cameras. I had to time my movements during a security guard's coffee break that Logan had cleverly arranged. I finally found Haley locked in a study at the end of the hallway, but the door required a different access code. I had to risk communicating with Logan through a kitchen staff member to get the numbers needed to unlock it. I finally reached Haley, who was shaken but physically unharmed. She revealed Jack was planning to frame her for corporate espionage using planted evidence. We attempted to leave through a service corridor, but encountered Jack with 2 security guards coming up the stairs. We had to retreat deeper into the restricted areas of the mansion. The chase led us to the estate's private document room where generations of Riverstone secrets were stored. Jack was right behind us, so Haley quickly barricaded the door with a heavy filing cabinet. While I frantically searched for anything else we could use as evidence, we photographed as many incriminating files as possible using the phone Logan had hidden for us earlier. Among the documents, we discovered a map of chemical dump sites throughout the county. I realized with absolute horror that one was directly beneath my childhood home. I finally understood why both my parents had developed rare cancers within months of each other 2 years ago. Security began breaking through the barricaded door. We noticed a dumbwaiter system in the corner of the room that looked big enough for a person. Haley and I squeezed inside, closing the door just as security broke through. The dumbwaiter led down to the kitchen. We spotted Logan across the crowded ballroom talking to some guests, but Jack was now actively searching for us with more security guards. We used the crowd of wealthy donors as cover while slowly making our way toward the exit. Logan created a diversion by publicly confronting his father about the contamination in front of major donors. Jack spotted us trying to slip out a side door during the commotion and cornered us in the estate's grand library, blocking the only exit. I revealed I was recording our conversation on the phone Logan had given me, which made Jack noticeably nervous. He grabbed a letter opener from a nearby desk, threatening us with it. Jack lunged at Haley with the improvised weapon, but I pushed her out of the way and took the cut across my arm. Blood splattered across priceless books, and the commotion drew the attention of nearby guests. The Riverstone Patriarch ordered security to remove everyone from the scene, claiming I had injured myself while attempting to steal valuables. But several guests had already recorded Jack's attack on their phones, and the truth was spreading beyond the family's control. Then the federal agents finally showed up with their warrant, forcing local authorities to step aside for the federal investigation. Jack tried destroying evidence by setting fire to the document room, but the sprinkler system activated immediately. The water actually preserved water-stained proof of wrongdoing on papers that would have otherwise burned completely. His desperate act backfired perfectly. The Riverstone's lawyer approached me with an offer of a substantial settlement to drop all charges and sign an NDA. I thought about my parents and all the other victims of their environmental crimes over decades. I refused any amount of money in exchange for my silence. Federal agents arrested Jack and the Riverstone executives on multiple charges ranging from kidnapping to environmental crimes. As we finally left the estate, Logan approached with an unexpected offer to testify against his family, on the condition of witness protection afterward. With his testimony, the case grew even stronger. 6 months later, justice finally arrived. The Riverstone family faced federal charges for environmental crimes, and Jack received a 15-year sentence for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. Their vast fortune was placed in a victim compensation fund, with my parents and hundreds of others receiving treatments they could never afford before. Haley and I used part of my settlement to start a foundation supporting victims of manipulation and environmental justice causes. We bought a little house together with a garden, far from contaminated soil. V joined our organization, bringing her expertise in helping vulnerable women rebuild their lives. Sandy completed therapy and now works as our foundation's outreach coordinator, turning her trauma into purpose. My parents' health has stabilized with proper treatment, and they've worked through their own issues in family therapy. Sometimes at night when Haley and I sit on our porch watching fireflies, I think about how close I came to losing the most important person in my life over a manipulator's lies. But then I remember how our friendship proved stronger than all the obstacles thrown our way. We survived because we chose to trust each other when it mattered most. And in the end, that's the only thing worth fighting for.